Hi, welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Demetrius, one of the calendar's astrologers. Our portrait this week is part of our music series, and this is Taylor Swift. Now, if you've never heard of Taylor Swift, where you been? There's a tremendously well-known singer, and in fact, it's great because we get to find some of those markers in the chart that relate to great fame. Especially in her case, young fame as well. Now, before I get started, remember that we post our portraits on Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube every Tuesday. We post our forecast for the coming week every Friday. You can go there. Please subscribe. It's a big help to us. And push that little red bell, and that way you'll get notified when they come up because you want to know what's going on. And right now we're in the midst of this music series. I think there's going to be about 10 artists in there, and then we're going to move on to another series. I think couples. We've been speaking about couples. That would be fun. So Taylor Swift was born on December 13th, 1989 at 5:17 a.m. EST, Reading, Pennsylvania. She's born with the sun at 21 degrees Sagittarius. She has Scorpio Rising, and she has the moon in Cancer. What's interesting is that, yes, she's a Sagittarian, and we've seen this a whole bunch of times among actors. It is the only planet that she has in her sun sign. Everything else is someplace else. At the rising, because she's a second house sun, in the rising, right at the ascendant, within 1 degree, is Mars. So Mars loves being at the ascendant. Mars just, I'm right here. You know, where are you looking at? I'm right here. It really likes to step up. It's in Scorpio, the sign of feminine power, the feminine ruling sign. This is a person with great physical drive, really fearless in a certain way. Though strategic. Scorpio is fearless but strategic, okay, which means when it's time to get out of there, she gets out of there. Right above the ascendant, she has Pluto at 16 degrees, Juno at 8 degrees. Now, this is kind of interesting because she's got the marriage asteroid rising, conjunct Pluto. So people meet her and think, boy, wouldn't she make a wonderful wife? But it's in Scorpio. So you really would want to check her for knives, right? At least, you know, if she commits, she's really going to commit. Okay, she expects you to not commit and not blink when she says commit. Now, the Sagittarius Sun is much more jovial. It's more outgoing. It's more fun. The fact is in the second house. What's in the second house? Music. It's the house of Taurus. It's the house of music and the arts. And that's where her sun is. That's her anchor, is her sun in the second house. She then has Uranus, Mercury, Neptune, and Saturn all in Capricorn. In the third house of youth, right? Mercury is in his own house, the third house, Gemini's house, conjunct Uranus, right? So the house of youth, Mercury in its own house, in Capricorn, the sign of ambition, conjunct Neptune and Saturn, the planet of ambition, in its ruling sign. In Saturn's let's climb that ladder, in the feminine ruling sign. So success, the way a woman looks at success. Conjunct Mercury in youthfulness. She was, I think, the youngest artist ever signed by this particular label. I mean, she was tremendously young when she first showed up on the scene. She's still pretty young, born in, 89. Conjunct Uranus. Now, this is fascinating because as we've looked at people who really became mega stars, one of the things we've seen again and again is Uranus is a big player. Many times at the rising, many times at the sun, sometimes at the moon. Those are the big players. Here it's at the Mercury, in Mercury's house, in the house of youth. Yes, exciting as a very young person. That was part of the excitement. She's so young and she's so talented. And that was really part of her sizzle. That Uranus really adds the sizzle. You know, Uranus relates to the first section of the aura just beyond the physical body. It's where you get sparks. You know, when you touch a person, and you get sparks between them. That's what's interacting. Your close aura and their close aura is interacting because you feel it. It's right there at your nervous system. Zzz, And she has that. So when she meets you, it's Mercury in the third house, the house of what? The hands. So when she meets you, she passes that sizzle to you. It's also in the third house, the house of what? Writing. She's a songwriter. a very well-known songwriter, a very young songwriter, and she writes about both Uranus, disruptive issues. She was famous for a whole series of songs about her breakups with boyfriends, disruptive issues, revolutionary issues, and Neptune, right? Romance, and Saturn, taking responsibility. And she's a very responsible person. Is a very responsible person. Now, the moon is its own story, because realize here the sun is below the horizon. Whenever the sun is below the horizon, the moon becomes more important. If the moon is above the horizon, in other words, when she was born, the moon was out, right? And it was not quite full. It was in Cancer. So the moon is in its feminine ruling sign, highly elevated in the ninth house, a house that the moon happens to like a lot, likes the ninth house because of its relationship to Jupiter. And who is it conjunct? Jupiter in Cancer. It's exalted sign. So the moon in rulership, Jupiter exalted, conjunct in the ninth house. Now, the thing that's kind of funny is that she has Jupiter retrograde in the ninth house. And usually people with Jupiter retrograde, highly elevated, usually means that their success comes later. But I mean, she's always had success from very early, but it's in Cancer. So maybe she'll become a parent later. Maybe she'll become an advocate for children later, because Jupiter's the sign of the advocate. And remember, Jupiter's in the ninth house. Its own house, the house of Sagittarius, exalted with its fave, the moon. So this is a person who has great emotional strength, great emotional depth, right there on display, that she's able to capitalize on because it's conjunct Jupiter, right? It's also interesting conjunct the vertex at 9 degrees. It goes from 1 degree for the moon, 7 degrees for Cancer, 9 degrees for the vertex, 15 degrees for Chiron. So there's something fateful about this. Her starting off in Reading, Pennsylvania, and coming to great success far away from her home. And that's what it means. Jupiter, you can have success far from your home, or for traveling. And she's done a huge amount of traveling. It has a certain fated quality to it. And remember, we're not at the full moon, because the sun is in Sagittarius, the moon is not opposite it. We've actually we're just after the full moon, but the moon is bright in its own sign. So that moon in Cancer, in many ways, is more powerful than that sun in Sag. So her identity as a woman out in the world, the ninth house, out in the world, being ambitious, being sharing. I mean, she's a very, very generous person as well. She's done a great deal for other people. In the ninth house is something that she takes great pride in. It's part of her joyfulness. Now, we have to look at Venus, right? I mean, you can't talk about girls and not look at Venus. You do that with guys too, but with Venus, it's really very important. Her Venus is right at the base of the chart in the fourth house, not a especially strong house for it, in Aquarius. Okay, Venus in Aquarius, conjunct loosely Vesta, which is about, Vesta is, the flame. It's about, the feminine power, but the feminine power to sustain, to endure. Conjunct her Venus in Aquarius, a sign that's all about disruption. And she has had a lot of kind of disruptive relationships. But on the other hand, it also meant that in her home, there were things about her home that were very modern. That, the fact that she became so successful, so young, would have made for a very unusual home life. I mean, you can't have someone this talented, you can't be a parent raising a child that is this successful, like this talented and this ambitious, and it not disrupt your home. I mean, it's like, I think it was Alexander the Great who they described that he was like a musical string, that when he crossed all the other musical strings, he was so strong, he just broke them. It's that very strong personality, that Mars rising in Scorpio, the moon and Jupiter in the ninth house, the Mercury in the third house. This is a strong personality, but it resulted in an unusual home life. And yet she very much believes in her home. She has Vesta there, and she believes in having a home that's different from the traditional. Because, Aquarius is a Saturn ruled sign, but it's the second step of Saturn. It's, okay, we have the foundation now. Now, what can we do with that? What can we do with society with that? How can we go beyond ourselves and help others? How can we go beyond ourselves and remake the world? And that's really her ethic. I don't really know her story other than knowing that she was signed very young, and I've heard some of her music. But I do suspect that with the Jupiter conjunct the moon in the ninth house, that her mother was very, very important in her life in terms of really saying, you can do anything, Taylor, you can do anything. Don't worry. You can accomplish this, and really believing in her and instilling in her a lot of confidence. Whoever taught her how to fight, that Mars and Scorpio, well, that's a whole other thing. Does she have a lot of brothers? Maybe, but she really has that sense of physical confidence. But I think the thing that's really interesting is that Mercury-Uranus conjunction in the third house. That brilliance, so young, and it's so identifiable. See, when someone like this has like Mars at the rising, okay, and then the sun right after it, and then Mercury after that, people get them. They recognize them because we see people from their ascendant and then in succession. In other words, we see the planets at the rising or whatever the rising sign. Then we see what are planets in the second house. It's their layers, like the layers of the onion. You first meet someone, hi, my name is, Ralph D. Because okay. Then we shake hands. We go through this. First, you see my physical appearance, that's the ascendant. Then you hear my voice, that's the second house. Then we touch hands, that's the third house. And then we go have a meal, that's the fourth house, right? But you eat together, you break bread together, that's the fourth house. And then if it's boy and girl, then you flirt, and that's the fifth house. And one thing leads to another, and you work your way around. But this is how we experience people. She's got Mars at the rising. People recognize that very, very quickly. People recognize Mars rising people by their physical presence very quickly. Then she's got the sun, the second house, and that big musical talent. Sun in the second house of music in Sagittarius. When Jupiter, the ruling sign for that, is so strong, her big talent was obvious very early. And then right past there is the Mercury, right? This is someone who's hardworking and ambitious. She's a hardworking, ambitious kid. God, how many times did they say that about her, do you think? She's a hardworking, ambitious kid. Mercury with Saturn in the third house. How many times, right? But she had Uranus there, so she had the sizzle that came with it, right? And this is how people saw her. So you find this a lot of times with people who come to their goals early in life. They have a lot of visible planets at the rising, and so people just recognize them and they support them in who they are. Now, the thing that's funny about this, of course, is the Uranus in the third house, that the sizzle's there. But the other thing that's there is right at the rising is the Pluto. This is someone who's deeply perceptive of other people on a very visceral level. They say people with Pluto rising tend to have X-ray vision. They're very deeply perceptive of others, and that's part of her personality. And what's opposite Pluto, which is interesting, is the part of fortune. Very important, the part of fortune. It shows how you connect to the world financially. It's in the seventh house in Taurus. Taurus is music. Seventh house, it's her ability to do partnerships and sign contracts. That was so important to her success, her willingness to commit to a partnership. She was one of the youngest artists signed to a major label. See?
And she was the first artist to pull her music off of Spotify,
right.
and that whole ninth house with the litigation.
Oh, right. She was the first artist to pull her music off of Spotify, and having an extensive litigation. Jupiter in Cancer in the ninth house. She's like I said, she's fearless and she's strategic. Jupiter in the ninth house makes a person very strategic. Mars and Scorpio at the rising makes a person very strategic. She did not get to where she is by not thinking this out and planning and basically aiming for effectiveness. She's a very, very smart person. Now, one final thing, and that's pretty much Taylor Swift. She has Virgo at the midheaven. She has Virgo in the midheaven at 8 degrees Virgo in the 11th house, which is funny because it's not the career house. The big, I want to be successful and well known, is the 10th house. I want to be very knowledgeable is the 9th house, and that she's got that filled. And in some ways, she has Leo in the 10th house, so being well known and a leader was just like falling off a log to her. But really, how she sees her role is as a woman or a young woman in the world, being an example and helping her friends, helping her community. This is really her mission. I think as she goes through life, her ability to be a role model for women, I think is a very important part of her lifelong contribution. She's still a young woman, so it's, it's still up in the air. But I think that's a really important part. Oh, one final thing too. I said I did a final thing. I'm doing another final thing. The 5th house, which has to do with romance, and romance has been a big, and creativity, of course. She has Pisces there, okay? Which once again goes back to that Jupiter. But in other words, her ability to write about things, about, the pain of it, and, express that so effectively, that really is part of her creative gift. This is not accidental. It's that ability to say, I can feel deeply about these things. It's that moon conjunct Jupiter. She can feel deeply about things and still get back on her feet. And that's really the talent. So that's Taylor Swift. Fascinating chart. Oh, one little other thing. She has Scorpio Rising. We were doing a rectification of Gal Gadot's chart, and we didn't know her rising. And another astrologer commented that they really thought that Gal had Scorpio rising because she looked a lot like Taylor Swift, and she had some of the same body language. And I really think that they might be right, because Gal Gadot is very sexy, and yet she has no Scorpio in her chart, and she's sexy in a Scorpio way, kind of slinky sexy, and there's no Scorpio obvious in her chart, but the rising would explain it. So, and they are in some ways, contemporaries. So that's Taylor Swift, very interesting chart. Come see us every Tuesday for the Astro Portraits. Come see us on Friday for the Astro Forecast for the coming week. We do those at Planetary Calendar Astrology. You can subscribe on there and click the little bell. You'll be reminded. Also, if you have not bought your calendars, or if you want to get our books and such, come to planetarycalendar.com, where we have all of our videos, including how to use the calendar. So until next time, be well.